Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my must-start and my must-sit running backs for week number 2 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Inside today's video, I'm going to be talking about some running backs that I believe to be must-starts as well as must-sits based upon their matchup in week number 2 of the 2021 fantasy football season. But before we get on into the video, I would like to ask if you do end up enjoying today's video and you are new to the channel, to please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, we put out content on here every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you hit that like button down below to help boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video. I'd also like to let you guys know that if you would like, I tweet about fantasy football news, all things fantasy football, and answer questions on there. You can follow me on Twitter at NotoriousFNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into the video. We will begin with my must-start running backs, and then halfway into the video, we're going to switch to the must-sit running backs for week number 2. So we begin with the must-starts. First must-start running back is Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans going up against the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle. Last week, Derrick Henry was immensely disappointing, and immensely may honestly be an understatement because normally when Derrick Henry disappoints, he's still going to get you like 10, 11, 12, maybe 13, 14 fantasy points on a bad day. This was a terrible day for Derrick Henry up against the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals defense completely suffocated the Titans. The Titans stood no chance at all. The offensive line crumbled. Taylor Lewan was on his ass all game long, and Chandler Jones sacked Ryan Tannehill 5 total times in that matchup. And I do not expect that bad of a game to happen from the Tennessee Titans again this season, and I expect an immense bounce back up against the Seattle Seahawks defense. Now, the Seattle Seahawks defense is far from terrible, as they looked relatively solid last week, but Jonathan Taylor, who played up against the Seattle defense last week, ran the ball 17 times for 56 yards with 6 receptions on 7 targets and 60 receiving yards. So unless the Tennessee Titans have just fallen off a cliff, have just been a team that everyone talked up, and they just have this humongous fall like Humpty Dumpty off the wall in 2021, then it should be relatively easy to see Derrick Henry have a bounce back game and the rest of the season be completely normal. Derrick Henry last year rushed for over 2,000 yards, and there's an extra game this season. I wouldn't be surprised if Derrick Henry still ended up rushing for 2,000 yards on the season, because this Tennessee Titans team is going to show fight in them. Sure, they lost in week number 1 against the Cardinals, but in no way should you expect Derrick Henry to fall off the edge of the earth here up against the Seattle Seahawks. I understand some people panic after week number 1 if their player has a poor performance, but I will continue to play Derrick Henry in week number 2 up against Seattle. Next up, we have Elijah Mitchell of the San Francisco 49ers going up against the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia. Elijah Mitchell was one of the hottest waiver wire pickups so far this year, and will probably be, unless there's a huge injury to another running back, the biggest waiver wire pickup of the year. People in leagues where you have fab budgets spent 100% of the budget on Elijah Mitchell. Raheem Mostert is now out for the season. Trey Sermon was a healthy scratch last week because it appeared that Elijah Mitchell beat him out in training camp. So now it's really just wheels up for Elijah Mitchell. Mitchell looked excellent in relief of Raheem Mostert with 19 carries for 104 rushing yards and a touchdown, while the Falcons looked terrible. Up against the Eagles last week, we should see a strong showing from the 49ers against that Eagles defense. I think the Eagles do have a relatively solid run defense, but Elijah Mitchell and this San Francisco 49ers team be perfectly fine up against them, while it is entirely possible that Trey Sermon ends up getting activated in this game and JaMycal Hasty gets more work. Mitchell should be the lead back in this backfield, and while there is definitely that bust potential because, hey, the 49ers like to use a bunch of running backs, it was never going to be just Raheem Mostert. It was never going to be, if Raheem Mostert got hurt, just Elijah Mitchell, or before this, we thought it would be just Trey Sermon. It was never going to be that, but if Elijah Mitchell is able to keep the hot hand in this offense, which he should be able to do in week number 2 up against the Eagles, then Elijah Mitchell has top 12 potential at the running back position, and you just don't sit that down on your bench. But before we get on in to the next must-start running back, I would like to let you guys hear a quick word from our friends and our sponsor over at Yahoo. Start the NFL season off right with Yahoo Daily Fantasy. To celebrate, we have a brand new exclusive deal launching today thanks to our partnership with Yahoo. If you are new to Yahoo and make your first deposit via the link in the description of this video, you will receive 2 months free free of Awesemo Plus Platinum for signing up and making your first deposit on Yahoo. Just make sure you sign up through the link provided, which is awesemo.com/yahoo-fantasy-promo. Just to emphasize, this offer is for new Yahoo users only. If you're already a Yahoo user, then you will not be eligible for this promo, and you must use the link in the description of this video for the 2 free months of Awesemo Platinum. You'll be getting access to our tools and projections specifically designed for Yahoo DFS to help you guys take down Yahoo's $200,000 NFL single game baller contest and the other contests to win big with Yahoo DFS. Take advantage and join Yahoo today. Back into the video, my next must-start running back is David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. David Montgomery had a matchup that I personally was very, very nervous about last week up against the LA Rams. And despite the Rams defense looking pretty stout, and despite Andy Dalton being completely and utterly shit, Montgomery still smashed that lineup with 16 rushes for 108 rushing yards and 1 touchdown, as well as getting 1 reception on 1 target for 10 yards. Last week, Dalvin Cook played relatively well up against this Cincinnati Bengals defense, so we should be able to easily project a big game out of David Montgomery. Sadly, even despite Tariq Cohen being out and being missing for a bunch of games, David Montgomery did not see this significant amount of increase in the receiving work because he only saw 1 target, got 1 reception for 10 yards, but it shouldn't really matter if this Bears team is able to keep up with the Cincinnati Bengals in a potential Andy Dalton revenge game, which I doubt will go very well for Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton is probably going to be the most confusing player, just like with Jimmy Garoppolo, because even in these positive matchups that these quarterbacks could have week in and week out, you never know when Justin Fields is just going to come in and run in a touchdown or throw a touchdown. You never know when Trey Lance is going to sneak his way in there and run in a touchdown or throw in a touchdown. Both of them did it last week, so I wouldn't be surprised if it happened in week number 2. I understand that this doesn't really have anything to do with the running backs, but I figured it was an important sentiment here up against the Bengals. I love David Montgomery. Next up, we have Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, a lot of people that had Najee Harris on their fantasy team started to panic. I saw a global panic from people who had Najee Harris because Najee Harris looked not very good up against the Buffalo Bills defense in his NFL debut. He carried the ball 16 times, just getting 45 yards, as well as 1 reception on the 3 targets he got for 4 yards. On paper, that was a tough matchup, so we didn't expect too much out of Najee Harris, but we didn't expect him to be that bad. He got less than 6 points in all formats in that game. But the bright spot of that game, the thing to look into, is the fact that no one else on the team, besides from Najee Harris, had a single carry. So, Najee Harris has a clear stranglehold over this backfield, and there is no worry for any of the other running backs to be taking away touches. We saw up against the Raiders on Monday night that Tyson Williams, as well as Latavius Murray, hit them with the 1-2 Floyd Mayweather of the 1-2 punch of those running backs. So I believe that Najee Harris is in a smash matchup for this game and will be a huge bounce back candidate for week number 2. Now into the must-sit running backs of the week. We begin with Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants going up against the Washington football team. Entering last week, Saquon was in a tough matchup up against the Broncos, and he was going to have that load management, but I believe that, you know what, maybe you could play him in certain spots, right? If it was Saquon Barkley versus some other running back I didn't trust, that was like, you know what, maybe roll out Saquon Barkley, and he may be all right. I don't expect a lot, but it might be better than the other running back you have. The worry here up against the Washington football team is exactly identical to what we saw last week. Last week, Barkley had 10 rushes for 26 yards, which is terrible, with 1 reception on 3 targets for 1 receiving yards. The worry, like I said, is exactly the same, that he's going up against a tough defense, and he may still be on that load management. And with a team in the New York Giants, who I believe to be complete and utter dog shit, and they're going up against a tough defense, Saquon Barkley will struggle, whether or not the load management, the snap count is on Saquon Barkley. But I still believe that it will be. Maybe in week 3 he is unleashed, but in week number 2, I would be very hard-pressed to start Saquon Barkley in week number 2 here up against a tough Washington football team defense on Thursday night. But before we get on into the next player that I want you guys to be sitting at the running back position, I would like to let you guys know that we have a YouTube channel for sports betting as well. If you love what we do for DFS and you love what we're doing on the Fantasy Football YouTube channel here, then you're going to want to subscribe to the Awesemo Odds channel. You can find the link in the description of this video. So go on and subscribe now, turn the notifications on, and enjoy what we have in store for sports betting. Back into it, my next must-sit running back is James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals going up against the Minnesota Vikings. Going into week 1, I personally believed that this was going to be a very strong RBBC, meaning running back by committee, between Conner and Chase Edmonds. The running back who was more successful would become the starter because there was a lot of talk in the offseason of, hey, this is a hot hand approach, meaning whoever is the hot hand in the game would be getting the touches, and then eventually that would be the guy that became the starter of the team. And in week number 1, Cliff Kingsbury clearly trusted Chase Edmonds and was giving him a majority of the touches. Edmonds ran the ball 12 times for 63 yards, as well as tacking on 4 receptions on 4 targets for 43 receiving yards. Now, technically, Conner did see more carries, but overall on the game, James Conner saw the useless carries because he had 16 carries, and he got fewer yards than Edmonds. He only got 53 yards, whereas Edmonds got 63 with just 12 rushes, and he didn't get a single pass-catching opportunity, which was one of the upsides to James Conner, is that he's a very solid receiving back. So he didn't see that. And then if you look at it, if you look at the stats, you rewatch the game, you realize that half of James Conner's workload was coming in the fourth quarter when the Cardinals were beating the fuck out of the Titans. The game was already over. So it appears that the true starter of the team is Chase Edmonds, and unless something changes, James Conner, even in a relatively easy matchup up against the Minnesota Vikings, where we saw Joe Mixon carve them up, I am not trusting James Conner this week. Next up, we got a duo running back of Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon of the Denver Broncos going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Melvin Gordon looked really good in week number 1 up against the Giants, rushing the ball 11 times for over 100 yards and 1 touchdown, as well as tacking on 3 receptions on 3 targets for 17 receiving yards. In the exact same game, Javonte Williams rushed the ball 14 times for 45 yards with 1 reception on 1 target for -4 yards. While Gordon played very well, it was very evident that the split share was going to be there. That Gordon is not going to be able to get the stranglehold away of the offense, that he's going to be able to take over and be the clear running back 1 despite that big game. Javonte Williams will still be utilized. If this is the case week to week, it will be very confusing which running back you want to be starting. Because even if Melvin Gordon comes out week 2, blows the back out of the Jacksonville Jaguars and plays amazing, guess what's going to happen? Vic Fangio is still going to roll both of those motherfuckers out with a basic 50-50% split share. Now, again, it's not going to be exactly 50-50. Maybe some weeks it's 55-45 in Gordon's favor. Then maybe another week it's 55-45 in Williams' favor. But unless one of them was to get hurt, knock on wood, we don't root for injuries, it will appear that on a week-in, week-out basis to be very, very hard to figure out which running back you want to start. Now, if you were to ask me between the two, who would I start in week 2 based upon what we saw in week number 1, I'm playing Melvin Gordon, but I don't expect too much from either of them because of how risky it is to play either running back. Final must-sit running back of the week is Mark Ingram of the Houston Texans going up against the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland. Mark Ingram last week played excellent up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which came as a surprise to many because this was going to be a game where I personally believed that the Texans would get rolled by the Jaguars. The Texans on paper looked like a not-so-hot team. The Jaguars, they got Lawrence, they got all these guys, and their defense on paper, in my opinion, was also better than the Texans. But that's not what happened at all. The Texans steamrolled the Jaguars. In that game, Ingram carried the ball 26 times for 85 rushing yards and 1 touchdown, with 1 target that amounted to 0 receptions. Even if Ingram continues to be the clear back between him, Lindsey, and David Johnson, this is a bad matchup. The Browns' defense is good. They have Myles Garrett, they have Jadeveon Clowney, I would be very nervous to start Mark Ingram, and I also wouldn't be surprised if there's a pivot in week 2. We go from Mark Ingram destroying the Jaguars to them being like, hey, you know what, it's David Johnson time or it's Philip Lindsay time. I'm not 100% sold in that this is truly Mark Ingram's backfield, so stay clear away in week number 2, especially with this tough matchup up against the Cleveland Browns. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying again, please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you guys also check out Yahoo Fantasy. When you deposit, you can get those 2 free months of Awesemo Plus Platinum with your first deposit on Yahoo DFS. Make sure you guys check that out. Again, follow me on Twitter at NotoriousFNTSY. I love you guys all. Have a great rest of your guys' day. Thank you for all the support you have shown to me as well as the others on the YouTube channel. Love you guys so much. Stay safe as always. Goodbye.